You are trying. Not the kind of trying that looks good from the outside. Not the kind that gets posted, witnessed, or applauded by anyone. The kind that happens at 2 a.m. when the room is silent and the world has gone still, and something inside you is still moving, still reaching toward a shape you cannot yet name but can feel pressing against the walls of your chest like something that needs to be born. You have said no to rooms that would have hollowed you out. You have sat alone on nights when others were somewhere laughing without you. You have carried a vision so private, so unfinished, that you learned early to stop sharing it with most people, not because it was incoherent, but because the people around you had stopped asking questions about the future a long time ago. They had made their peace with the ground, and you had not. And there is one person, the one you call your closest friend, who always seems to appear at the exact moment you begin to believe in yourself. Not with hostility, not with visible resistance, with warmth, with familiarity, with the particular ease of someone who has known you long enough to know exactly where the soft places are. And after every conversation with them, the fire in your chest is smaller, not extinguished, just reduced. Like a window was open somewhere in the room and nobody acknowledged the draft. You cannot explain why. They said nothing wrong. Their voice was warm. They asked the right questions, smiled in the right places, said the things a caring person is supposed to say. But you walked away feeling like your ambitions were slightly embarrassing, like you had been reaching further than was dignified, like perhaps the realistic version of your life, the one they quietly outlined when they said, "Just be careful," was the one you should have been building all along. You have never said this to anyone, because if you did, you would sound paranoid, ungrateful, like someone who mistakes concern for sabotage and calls kindness a weapon. But the body does not construct narratives, it only registers truth. And that sensation in the hollow of your stomach after you leave them, the specific weight of it, the way it sits differently from ordinary tiredness, you have felt it enough times now to know it is not imagination. It is information. If that description landed somewhere real in you, stay. Watch until the end. Because the fifth sign is the one that will finally give you the language for something you have been carrying without a name. And the name, when you hear it, will not feel like new knowledge. It will feel like recognition. There is a word Nietzsche used for precisely this phenomenon. Not English, not German. He borrowed it from the French, ressentiment. It does not translate cleanly into a single word, but its nearest meaning is this: the slow, silent accumulation of resentment inside a person who cannot act, who feels the gap between where they are and where they secretly wish they had gone, and who, having sat with that gap long enough, stops trying to close it, stops wanting to close it, and begins instead to build a philosophy in which the gap does not need to be closed, in which ambition is naivety, in which staying is wisdom. This is not ordinary envy. Ordinary envy is metabolized. It sees what another person has built and converts that sight into motion. I will move toward that. Ressentiment is envy that has been left in the dark too long. It has curdled. It no longer wants what the other person has. It wants the other person to stop having it, or better, to never fully realize they have it at all. And here is the architecture that makes it so difficult to identify. The person who carries ressentiment is frequently not conscious of it. It lives in the basement of the psyche, in what Carl Jung named the shadow, the vast interior repository of everything a human being has refused to integrate about themselves. The ambitions that were abandoned, the dreams that were surrendered and then reclassified as unrealistic, the fears that were dressed in the language of maturity and called practicality. The shadow does not dissolve when it is denied. Denial is not destruction. The shadow goes underground, and from underground it operates through the very structures the conscious mind has built to appear reasonable, caring, and well-intentioned. When your friend looks at you, truly looks at you, in a moment when you are lit up by something you are building, they do not only see you, they see, reflected back from the surface of your aliveness, the outline of everything they chose not to become. And the shadow's instinctive, involuntary response to that mirror is not admiration. It is the need to crack it. Not with hostility. Hostility would be visible. Hostility would name itself and could be addressed. The shadow is more sophisticated than that. It works through language, through timing, through the precise placement of a single word inside a sentence that is otherwise entirely kind. The first sign is the compliment that carries a blade. It constructs praise and diminishment into a single grammatical unit, so tightly woven that the recipient cannot locate the wound without appearing to reject the generosity. You're so lucky, not everyone gets opportunities handed to them like that. The surface is congratulation. The structure is this: your success is circumstantial. It was given, not built. It could be taken back. You seem so much more confident lately, even if not everyone sees it yet. The surface is affirmation. The structure is this: here is your strength, and folded inside it, a reminder that your strength is not yet universally legible, that there are people, unnamed, unspecified, who still see the earlier version of you. I just really admire how you don't let things get to you. I could never be that way. The surface is admiration. The embedded message: your equanimity is a performance, and I, who know you, am noting the performance. The mechanism is precise. The compliment is the wrapper. The diminishment is what remains after the wrapper is removed. And because the wrapper was genuine seeming, the recipient cannot bring the wound to the surface without sounding ungrateful. So they carry it inward. They replay the sentence at odd hours. They cannot identify why it settles wrong. And because they cannot identify it, they attribute the discomfort to their own sensitivity. They close the wound themselves, using self-doubt as the suture, which is, from the shadow's perspective, the ideal outcome. Second sign is the relief that surfaces when you fail. There is a German word for this too: Schadenfreude, the involuntary pleasure derived from another's misfortune. In a person whose shadow has been integrated, examined, acknowledged, brought into relationship with the conscious self, Schadenfreude surfaces occasionally and is recognized for what it is. It passes. In a person whose shadow has never been confronted, it functions as a pressure release valve, and it cannot be fully controlled. You tell them about a setback, a plan that unraveled, a day that broke in the middle. And for just a fraction of a second, too brief to be deliberate, too consistent to be accident, something in their face changes. The shoulders drop slightly. The quality of attention in their eyes shifts. The voice that responds is a degree warmer than usual. Not because your pain has moved them to tenderness, because your pain has temporarily restored the equilibrium that your progress had disturbed. That flash is the shadow surfacing through the gap between intention and reflex. They did not choose it. They would deny it if confronted. But the body is faster than the narrative the mind constructs, and you saw what you saw. If what you have heard so far is landing, if these patterns are not abstract but specific, not theoretical but recognizable from your own life, then this is the point at which to pause. Not to make a decision. Not yet. But to do something quieter and more difficult, to let yourself fully acknowledge what you already know. The information has been there for a long time. The body delivered it. The instinct flagged it. What has been missing is not evidence. What has been missing is permission. If this video is giving you that permission, share it with one person who is also building something in silence. Not to name anyone. Not to start a conversation you are not ready for. Just because the person who is quietly trying in the dark at 2 a.m. and deserves to know what they are navigating. And if you want to continue receiving this kind of analysis, the kind that does not comfort you but clarifies you, subscribe. The work here is not motivation. It is cartography. Maps for terrain that most people are moving through without knowing what it is called. The third sign lives inside the language of care. Every time a direction is chosen, a goal declared, a decision made, a step about to be taken, the response arrives immediately, without invitation. Without first asking enough questions to understand the full architecture of what is being built. The counsel comes quickly, and it is always oriented the same way. Not how does this succeed further. Always here is why this might not. The risks not yet considered. The people who attempted something similar and collapsed under the weight of it. The gap between current position and required position. The timing, the market, the odds. Every variable that could produce failure, assembled and presented with the care of someone who genuinely does not want to see you hurt. And that is the most important thing to understand about this sign. The person delivering it frequently means what they say. They are not performing concern, they experience it as concern. The shadow has so thoroughly colonized their relationship with possibility that they have lost the ability to distinguish between protection and contraction. They are offering you, with complete sincerity, the ceiling they installed above themselves years ago, and they experience the offering as love. But examine the pattern across time. Not a single conversation, the full sequence of conversations, laid out and observed from a distance. Genuine counsel expands. It asks, what do you need? What have you not yet considered that could accelerate this? What is the next threshold and how do we approach it? It is fundamentally oriented toward arrival. It treats the destination as real and works backward from there. What the person carrying ressentiment offers is oriented in the opposite direction. It is fundamentally oriented toward retreat. It treats the destination as suspect and works forward from doubt. And after enough of these conversations, the doubt does not stay in the conversation. It migrates. It takes up residence in the planning process itself. It begins to speak in your voice. Nietzsche named this slave morality in its most intimate and therefore most dangerous form. When a person cannot climb, they do not simply stop climbing. They construct a theology, a complete value system in which climbing is reframed as hubris, as instability, as the mark of someone who has not yet learned the virtue of acceptance. And then, with missionary sincerity, they carry that theology into the lives of the people they love. They are not lying. They have converted, and converted people convert others. The question to carry into every conversation of this kind is not, are they right? The question is, in which direction is this counsel pointed? Toward the horizon or away from it? The fourth sign requires attention not to content, but to atmosphere. There is a vision, something large enough to sound slightly unreasonable, which is the correct size for a real vision, because a vision that sounds entirely reasonable is simply a plan, and plans do not require the kind of interior reorganization that genuine becoming demands. This vision is shared, and the response is not argument. Argument would be honest. Argument would mean the vision was taken seriously enough to be opposed. The response is something smaller and more precise. A slight exhale through the nose, a shift in posture that is almost imperceptible, a turn in the subject that happens so naturally it could pass for normal conversational movement. Or the 5 words that function as one of the most effective instruments of ressentiment in the interpersonal register. But realistically speaking though, does not attack the vision. It relocates it. It lifts the thing being constructed in open air and places it inside a smaller room with a lower ceiling and continues the conversation as though the relocation was simply common sense. As though realism is a fixed coordinate that everyone with good judgment shares, rather than a story, one possible story among many, about what the future is allowed to contain. And after enough repetitions of that phrase, from that voice, in those conversations, a specific and terrible thing begins to happen. The smaller room starts to feel like the right room. The lower ceiling starts to feel like appropriate height. The vision that once pressed against the walls of the chest begins to reshape itself to fit the available space, and the reshaping begins to feel like maturity. This is the shadow's most complete operation. It does not need to destroy what you are building. It only needs to make you the one who builds it smaller. Jung described this through the persona, the mask constructed for social navigation, the face worn in the presence of the world's expectations. The person carrying ressentiment presents the persona of the grounded friend, the seasoned advisor, the one who loves you enough to keep you tethered to the real. But behind that persona, an older operation is running. Not groundedness, equalization. If you remain at the level where you currently stand, the distance between you is manageable. If you rise, the distance becomes a measurement. And that measurement is unbearable to a person who made peace with stillness by telling themselves that stillness is wisdom. Bringing you back to ground is not cruelty. It is self-preservation, which is why it feels so much like love. The 5th sign is not something said. It is something withheld. A threshold is reached. Not necessarily something the world would call significant, perhaps only a small proof of concept, a quiet confirmation that the direction is real, a moment where the thing built in silence finally produces a sound. It is shared. And the person who genuinely sees you responds, not because protocol requires it, but because they have been watching you carry the weight of this and they understand what it cost to arrive here. The person carrying ressentiment goes quiet, or responds after an unusual delay with something thin and interchangeable, something that could have been sent to anyone about anything. Or, in the most surgical form of this sign, they hear the news and within a single sentence the conversation has moved to them, to their week, to their own situation, as though your moment of arrival was simply a surface they needed to cross to reach the subject of themselves. This cannot be brought to anyone as evidence. It does not survive the translation into language. They didn't respond the way I needed sounds like a demand for performance. They made it about themselves sounds like pettiness. The architecture of the wound is designed so that the person who was wounded is the one who sounds unreasonable when they try to describe it. But recognition, the simple act of being witnessed in a moment that costs something, is not vanity. It is not a performance requirement. In the psychology of deep human development, recognition is a structural need of the psyche. Not applause, not celebration. The quieter thing, I see what you are building. I understand what it required. I am here as a witness to that. When someone withholds this systematically, not once in distraction, not occasionally in their own difficulty, but consistently and specifically in the moments of ascent, that pattern is not absence. It is presence. The presence of the shadow executing its most disciplined and patient operation. If diminishment through language draws too much attention, the shadow defaults to erasure through silence, and into that silence the ascending person pours their own doubt. They begin to question whether what was accomplished was real, whether it was worth sharing, whether they were foolish to expect it to register, whether they are, perhaps, simply too much. The answer is not that they are too much. The answer is that they are becoming something a wounded, unexamined psyche cannot hold without pain. And the silence is the most honest communication that person has offered, not a verdict on what has been built, a confession of what cannot be witnessed. Now the question that matters. Not who is this person? The body answered that question before the mind was ready to translate the answer. The question is, what does a person do with clear sight once they have it? The answer is not severance as a first move, not confrontation, not the assembly of evidence to be presented in a conversation that will almost certainly not produce the acknowledgement being sought. Those responses are still operating inside the logic of the wound, still requiring the person who cannot offer recognition to finally, this time, offer it. That is not liberation. That is the same architecture with a different arrangement of furniture. The first movement is what depth psychology calls radical discernment. The capacity to see without the distortion of either idealization or contempt. The person carrying ressentiment is not a villain. They are a figure who arrived at a crossroads in their own individuation, the long interior journey toward wholeness that Jung mapped across a lifetime, and chose, perhaps without full awareness that a choice was being made, the path of contraction. They are living inside a shadow that has never been brought into the light, carrying abandoned dreams that solidified into resentment. Wearing a persona so completely that the face beneath it has grown unfamiliar even to themselves. This does not make them safe, but removing them from the category of enemy is essential, not for their sake, but for the sake of the psyche that must continue its work. The interior life that is perpetually organized around opposition is an interior life spending its energy on war. And war, however justified, is the most expensive possible use of the resources required for building. See them as they are, not as who they were in better moments, not as who you needed them to be, as the specific, limited, wounded person they currently are. The second movement is architectural. Begin to treat unfinished work as Temenos, the ancient Greek concept of sacred enclosure, the protected ground within which the transformation becomes possible. The alchemists understood this principle in precise terms. The work of transmutation, the conversion of base matter into something refined, cannot be performed in the open market. It requires the sealed vessel, the controlled atmosphere, the darkness that belongs only to the process itself. Exposing the work prematurely to the wrong witnesses does not only risk discouragement, it interrupts the chemistry. Some things need to become solid before they can be seen. Not every person has earned the right to enter that space. The third movement is the most demanding because it requires the dismantling of a habit the ego has been building for years. The habit of seeking confirmation from the person who structurally cannot give it, not because they are withholding it as punishment, but because what is being asked of them, to affirm a life in motion, a self in the process of becoming, is precisely the thing that destabilizes their entire constructed relationship with what is possible. Rohn observed that a person becomes the average of the 5 people they spend the most time with. This is not an abstraction. It is a description of how the psyche is actually shaped by the emotional weather of the rooms it inhabits, by the invisible ceilings carried by the voices it internalizes daily, by the accumulated weight of what the surrounding environment treats as reasonable and what it treats as excessive. The person carrying ressentiment is not a neutral presence in the environment. They are a gravitational system. And gravity, unlike hostility, does not announce itself. It simply ensures that everything returns to the ground, steadily and visibly, with perfect patience. Nietzsche called the refusal to be defined by that gravity the will to power, not domination, not the reorganization of the world according to personal preference. The sovereign and interior act of self-authorship, the decision, made daily, remade in each conversation, practiced as discipline rather than declared as resolution, to be the one who draws the perimeter of what is possible for this particular life. To look at the ceiling installed by someone else's fear and recognize it for exactly what it is, their architecture. Built from their materials, sized to their dimensions, carrying no authority over a psyche that has chosen not to live inside it. The individuating psyche, the one genuinely engaged in the lifelong process of becoming whole, does not reach that wholeness by becoming harder or more defended or more isolated. It reaches it by becoming more precise, by developing the capacity to distinguish, with increasing clarity and decreasing delay, between the voices that carry it forward and the voices that, however warmly, however sincerely, however skillfully dressed in the language of love, are asking it to remain the size it was before it began to grow. That distinction is not cruelty. It is the most fundamental act of self-respect available to a human being in the middle of becoming something. You already know which voice is which. The body told you. The pattern confirmed it. The fifth sign, the silence at the exact moment when presence was needed, made it undeniable. What remains is not more information. What remains is the decision to act on what is already known, to stop organizing the interior life around the hope that this time the response will be different, to stop editing the vision down to a size that fits inside someone else's fear, to stop offering the most alive parts of yourself to the witness least equipped to receive them. Light does not negotiate with the dark for permission to exist. It burns, and it illuminates exactly what it chooses to illuminate. You are building something real. The cost of it is written in the hours you have kept and the rooms you have left and the version of yourself you have been willing to dismantle in order to construct something more true. That cost is not nothing. It is everything. And it deserves to be protected, not with walls but with discernment, not with distance, but with clarity about who has earned the right to stand close to the work while it is still becoming. If this analysis gave you language for something you have been navigating without a map, share it with one person who is building in silence, not to name anyone, not to start a conversation that is not yet ready, simply because the person who is trying alone at 2 a.m. in a room where nobody else can see the fire deserves to know what the terrain is called. Subscribe if you want to continue, not for motivation, not for permission, for cartography. The map continues.